Hello everybody and welcome to today's session in the Get Unstuck series with myself, Sarah Archer. I'm a career and leadership coach, and if you haven't met me before, I work with female leaders to either advance their careers, so finding that next leadership role, or to have more impact and influence in their existing leadership role. And I created this Get Unstuck series because I know, having been a female leader as an HR director, that it's really hard to find a time, because the day job is so full on, to think about your career, to think about your leadership development. And so I run these sessions twice a month, 15 minutes on various topics to inspire you, motivate you, get you thinking differently about your career or leadership, give you useful information. They're always practical. There's always things to take away and try out and implement straight away. And I also have a podcast, Unstuck and Unstoppable, covering similar topics, and I'll put a link if you prefer to absorb your content while you're walking the dog or in the gym. You can do it through the podcast. So I'm really pleased that you are joining me today because the topic we're talking about is how to be more of a self-compassionate leader. And I chose this topic because it's something I see a lot with the clients that I work with, that they're very hard on themselves, and they are often saying things like, I'm not good enough, why did I mess up, I should be doing more, and just really kind of beating themselves up. And obviously that takes its toll on your professional and personal life when you have a very vocal inner critic. And we all have an inner voice, but for some of us that inner voice is very loud and can be really hard to listen to. And if you're here with me live and you feel comfortable, I'd love you to share maybe when your inner critic shows up. You know, they can show up when we've made a mistake, they can show up in certain situations that might trigger us, they can show up just on a regular basis at the end of the day, the beginning of the day, in the middle of the day. So let me know, when your inner critic shows up for you, particularly if you feel comfortable sharing that. I had a client that I was working with recently who was a senior manager in tech, and she was a brilliant leader. She really championed her team. She created an environment that allowed them to experiment, to fail, to talk about, how they were feeling about things that were going on in the team, in the business, to feel kind of really a safe space. So she really was a compassionate leader. And she, they were very high performing because she created that safe space. But she was very hard on herself. Her inner critic was brutal, and she would never have spoken to any of her team members in the way that she spoke to herself. And that took its toll on her. So it led her to overthink things, to procrastinate, to have perfectionist tendencies. It also created a lot of stress for her because she was kind of having to present this external confidence that inside she just wasn't feeling, because that inner critic was so vocal. And obviously, that when you don't manage that can lead to burnout, it can lead to indecision, it can lead to you playing small and sabotaging your career in the long term. Now, often that inner voice that we have has been around for so long that we kind of just accept it for part of our way of being, and its language that it uses. We don't challenge it. We just accept that that voice for what it is. And obviously there are specific techniques that you can use to manage that inner critic, that inner voice, because we're not talking about getting rid of it. It's part of who we are. It has a purpose. It's part of our protection system that the brain utilizes. It can offer up useful information, but we don't want it to be doing that in a way that hinders us, that makes us feel worse about ourselves. And there are techniques to start to specifically manage that. But what we're going to talk about today is actually building a self-compassion practice, because that can be a great foundation for them managing that inner critic that speaks because it's feeling unsafe and it's fearful for what could happen. And so the self-compassion practice that you start to develop can help to manage that fearful inner critic and allow it to become more of an inner coach, which is what we ultimately want. And so what I'm going to talk you through today is a few self-compassion techniques that you can use. And I'm also going to put a link in the comments to Christine Neff's website, who is an academic who's done a lot of research around self-compassion. And she has a self-compassion quiz, which you can take to help you pinpoint where you might be really, really hard on yourself. So I'll put a link to that as well in the comments. But, you know, I often say, you know, kindness is a superpower even, and it's underrated. You know, people think it can be soft, it's a weakness potentially in business, but actually I believe it's a real strength, and it can be very strategic, because the research shows that it builds resilience, it helps reduce stress, and it improves emotional intelligence. You know, so if you're being self-compassionate to yourself, it's going to allow you to show more of that compassion to other people in business, in your team. And it's also going to allow you to have more energy for the kind of external work, because you won't be spending so much energy trying to manage that internal dialogue all the time. So self-compassion has sort of 3 pillars, if you like. So pillar 1 is self-kindness over self-judgment. So what that enables you to do is notice mistakes or things that haven't gone well without spiraling into that self-criticism. So that's the first kind of pillar. The second is common humanity over isolation. So remembering that you're not alone on this journey, that everybody is struggling with something, and that, you know, leadership is going to have challenges that you're going to have to navigate, and that you're not alone in navigating them. Other leaders will be struggling with similar things. And the third one is mindfulness over identification. So enabling you to observe your thoughts, to notice what is going on, but not become those thoughts. So, and some of the techniques I'm going to talk you through today will help with that, because what we do is we tend to get stuck in our thoughts, we can ruminate, we can, you know, overthink things, and that can lead to paralysis, it can lead us to feeling stuck. So being able to kind of observe those thoughts, to notice what's going on, and then choose to take action is a much more powerful and compassionate approach to take. So obviously the first thing that we want to think about is that awareness piece. So noticing our thoughts. And as I sort of referenced earlier, often we've had that inner critic voice in our heads for so long, we stop actually noticing what it's saying to us and how damaging those thoughts can be. So just being able to kind of stop and pause and notice when you're triggered, what is it that you're actually saying to yourself, and writing that down, because that will give you perspective. So if you start to notice you're saying things like, I'm so stupid, how could I have made that mistake? Why didn't I anticipate what was going on? I'm not good enough to do this job, I should leave. Nobody's going to listen to me. You know, all those really unhelpful thoughts. It can help you see how hard you are being on yourself and the impact of that. So the first thing is just starting to notice that, just pressing pause on things and noticing what it is that your inner critic is saying to you. And then one of the tools that you can use is to think about what you would say to your best friend in a similar situation, or a team member, whichever is most helpful to you. But if your best friend was saying, oh, you know, I really messed up at work, I made a mistake, I'm so stupid, they're going to probably sack me because I've made this error, I'm obviously not very good at my job, you're not going to respond with, well, yes, definitely you should leave, they're going to sack you if you don't leave first. You know, you're not going to say that to your friend. you're going to give some perspective to your friend. You're going to say, well, there were probably contributory factors to why that particular strategy didn't land. What can you learn from this situation? And how could you help yourself next time? You're going to be giving some helpful thoughts and questions to your best friend. So just being able to step back and think, what would I say to my best friend? What would I say to a team member in a similar situation? Is a much more compassionate way of responding to something that hasn't gone well. And then the second tool that we can think about is to reframe the inner critic. So this is to help us move away from kind of that over-identification with what's happened. So rather than saying, I've failed, we might choose to say, I'm learning from this, or that strategy failed and I'm learning from this. So rather than it damaging our sense of self, by choosing to say, I'm not good enough, I've failed, it's repositioning it and reframing what that inner critic is saying to you. And then the third thing that you can do is to just do a micro self-compassion check-in. So just to kind of pause, take a breath, and just acknowledge that, this is tough for me at the moment. I'm doing the best, I've got this. And then even asking, what do I need right now? Can just be a really compassionate way of approaching something, and even thinking about the tone of voice. So what tone of voice do I need to hear? Often our inner critic is quite harsh, and we might want to use a tone of voice that is more comforting, more soothing. We can also think about touch, because when we're being compassionate, we want to be releasing oxytocin, because that can help us to calm our nervous system. And so even just doing a self-hug where you are placing your hands on your shoulders and maybe just stroking your arms can be a really nice way of, in the moment, giving yourself a bit of compassion. Or if that doesn't feel possible, but maybe you're in an office where you can't do that, even just stroking your hand gently is a way of soothing yourself and being compassionate. And that you might feel resistance to that because it might feel unnatural. But it's what you might do to a child or to a friend, is to give them a hug and to touch them and to stroke them and to make them feel that sense of safety and compassion. So trying out maybe one of those three things. So thinking about, what would I say to a friend in this situation? First of all, noticing what it is your critic's saying to you. Then to think about, what would I say to a friend? And then to reframing some of the language the inner critic is using, and writing that down, that can be really helpful to use next time as well. And then doing that micro self-compassion check-in. So, just remember that self-compassion is a strength, and it's a tool that as a leader you can grow, that's going to be so useful for you. It's also going to be enable you to role model great self-compassionate leadership for your team and for your peers. And just to think about this week, where does my inner critic show up? What triggers my inner critic? In my leadership, where do I find I'm most harsh on myself? And what's one way that I could be more self-compassionate this week? What's one thing I could do for myself? What do I need this week to help me feel that I'm moving towards self-compassion? So I really hope that you found that useful, that it's maybe given you pause for thought in terms of, if you are very hard on yourself, just thinking a little bit more about how you can move to become a more self-compassionate leader. Have a great week. Please do try out one of those self-compassionate tools, and I will be back here in 2 weeks' time with another leadership or career topic for you. Thank you very much for joining me today.